Hi, welcome again. We are talking about Dungeons and Dragons, or Tasha's Cauldron to everything, and session 0 is in fact the topic for today. Okay, so guess what? I had thought I would be able to cover this pretty easily because I didn't actually dislike this section at all. The thing that I did discover as I was working my way through this is that, well, frankly, I'm just going to make some slight adjustments because my my internet is wigging out and it's already told me something. So just give me a second. For those of you who are wondering what's happening, I just need to make an adjustment. Okay, so we should be back. I don't know that necessarily the live stream that you're currently seeing is the one that I wanted you to see. There may be two versions. Just going to check to make sure there isn't, because I don't know if there is or not. So just sorry about that. I made an adjustment at the last minute and that may have sort of messed with people, making things a bit confusing. So if I've done that, I do apologize. Okay, so that seems to be right. Okay, so we're in the right place. Hi Matt, hi Pat, hi Nick, hi Fender, how's it going? Okay, hopefully everybody's in the right place. Okay. So the deal is for today, we're talking about session 0. The thing is, with all of my live streams, I'm definitely going to put the start time down in the description when it goes high definition and YouTube publishes it as a high definition video. The thing is, I noticed they didn't do it this time. And I've been waiting and waiting and waiting for the last one to go high definition and it didn't do that. So really strange, I don't understand. Global production and gaming review. I am in New Zealand. That's Helensville, so that's sort of about an hour from Auckland to the north. That's where I am. Purple Jenny, how's it going? Kanoko, hello, how's it going? Okay, I'm going to put the start time down here in the description. Once the YouTube actually makes it high definition, or so many days pass that I don't think they're ever going to make it high definition, then I'll put the start time in for those of you, okay? So you can actually get past all of this. I do apologise if it just seems to be a bit disorganised today. It's a very hot day in New Zealand. It's very, very warm. Hi Fred, how's it going? The sound seems to be working good, which is excellent news. Now, all of my live streams are going to be public until the edited version gets released. Once the edited version is released, that will go public. It will not include the Q&A or questions and answers at the end of the video, all of the preamble at the beginning, so it's a much tighter version. The thing is that the live stream will go unlisted once the edited version goes public, and I do this for a particular reason. So if you want to access the live stream, you need to do it pretty quickly, or subscribe, hit the bell button, turn on notifications. If you're a patron, you always get access to the live streams, and that's not a problem. Plus all my notes for all of my videos as well, for those of you who are interested in that sort of thing. Now, how do I actually present my live streams? So usually I sort of say hi to everybody at the very beginning, but we're going to get straight into this because I cannot sit in this room for too long. I present everything from my notes, and then as I've work my way through that, I'm presenting slides to you rather than my face. Okay, it just makes it easier for me to present everything. Then at the end of the presentation, we're going to go back to the webcam and my face, and I will answer questions and take feedback. All of that stuff does happen. I'm going to have to drink a lot during this live stream because it's like an oven in this room. And that's sort of the easiest way for me to deal with all of this. It just makes the edited version a much tighter, cleaner product for those people who don't want the live streams. And there's still a few people who don't like the live streams, although I have noticed a lot of people prefer to see me live rather than not live. So that's always good. I think that's fantastic. Okay, we've done enough. Let's get into the actual video content, start talking about the topic, because that's why you're here. Hi, welcome to How to D&D. My name is Fred Wheeler, and today I want to talk about Dungeons and Dragons. Oh yes, we're going to talk about inter-party conflict. No, not really, and inter-party conflict is not a deal breaker. No, actually the topic for today is in fact Session 0 in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. Wow, we've been really looking forward to this. A lot of people have been hanging out for some official information on Session 0. I'd like to point out that actually there has been information on Session 0 from Dungeons & Dragons officially for quite some time, but I will explain what I mean very, very shortly, not just yet. I'm going to start off this particular video with a summary of Session 0. I'm doing it back to front. So I'm going to do my summary, then I'm going to show you everything. Then I'm going to discuss each part as I go. Okay, for those of you who want it back to front, you're getting it back to front. This is actually an introduction, this Session 0 in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. It's an introduction for beginners. I would consider it a beginner's guide to Session 0 by Wizards of the Coast. This well may be the first time an official Dungeons & Dragons book has discussed Session 0 that I know of, but it's not the first time that officially Dungeons & Dragons has talked about Session 0. And if you play Dungeons & Dragons Adventurers League, you would know this, because quite often when you are running a game as a Dungeon Master, you will run what is called Session 0. And this is where the players come and create their characters, and you usually go over the basics of the rules, or you at least ask the players to read through the booklet that gives you a guideline on the rules and guides for playing in organised public play. And that is sort of the expectation. It doesn't always work that way, of course. This section really could have pretty much been taken out of the Dungeons & Dragons Adventurers League guide, if you ask me. But this section on Session 0 should have been in the Dungeon Master's Guide. The very first Dungeon Master's Guide for Dungeons & Dragons 5e, when we first got it way back in 2014, it should have been there, and it's not there. And I don't think that's actually a particularly good thing. And as I said, this could easily have been taken, this section, from the Dungeons & Dragons Adventurers League Dungeon Master Guide. Now, it's going to kind of read like a Dungeon Master taking a sledgehammer to the players in some sections. Not all sections, but on some occasions you'll see some text and you'll think, oh my lord, are they really serious about actually saying that or doing that? I'd like to point out to you that Dungeons & Dragons Adventurers League advice on Session 0 will be fine for public organised play, but it would be harmful if you're playing with friends or close friends, and particularly if you're playing with family and you have kids at the table. This is one time you probably don't want to necessarily just look at what's in the book and say, okay, that's how we're going to do it. But chances are, if you're a parent and you're running your kids through it, you're never going to do these things anyway because you know better, okay? There's not enough information for an intermediate dungeon master to actually get anything out of Session 0 in this section. Particularly for experienced dungeon masters, they won't find pretty much any of this useful. If you're an experienced dungeon master, you've probably already gone and looked into this particular topic in the past. You're probably already running Session 0s or some form of that. There are much better resources discussing Session 0 for free on the internet. In fact, you could pretty much go to any YouTuber and they will probably have better resources that you could utilize in your game with regard to Session 0. I would also like to point out that really, even though I've said all these things, there's nothing particularly wrong with the Session 0 section they have provided you with. It's only about 3 pages, which is not an awful lot of material, plus, whatever pictures you've got in there, so it's not a full 3 pages in a book. But there's nothing particularly wrong with it. It's just that it would have been nice to have a bit more. It's a bit like being Oliver Twist saying, please sir, can I have a bit more? And of course we don't necessarily get a bit more. Okay, so let's have a look at the first part of Session 0 they provide us with. Before making characters or playing the game, the Dungeon Master and players can run a special session. Colloquially, it's called Session 0, to establish expectations, yes, outline the terms of a social contract, we'll go into that later, and share house rules. Making and sticking to these rules can help ensure that the game is a fun experience for everybody involved? Absolutely. Often a session 0 includes building characters together. As the Dungeon Master, you can help players during the character creation process by advising them to select options that will serve the adventure or the campaign, okay, that awaits them. And of course, that would be pretty much what we want to actually get out of our session 0. They've covered, frankly, I would say they have covered all of their bases there. There's nothing wrong with what they've got there. The definition of session 0, it's broad enough to cover everything and most of the aspects of the game. Maybe it doesn't spell everything out in detail, but that's sort of beside the point. Okay, let's have a look at the next section, because they go straight into character creation and party creation, which I know a lot of people would say, well, actually, we should be going somewhere else before we deal with that. But you can rearrange it in terms of the order you do things. It's not a big deal. So character creation and party creation. Each player has options when it comes to choosing a character race, class, background. Though you may restrict certain options that are deemed unsuitable for the campaign, if there are multiple players in the group, you should encourage them to choose different classes so that the adventure party has a range of abilities. It's less important that the party includes multiple backgrounds, as sometimes it's fun to play an all-soldier party or a troop of adventuring entertainers. The backgrounds they choose define who their character were before becoming adventurers, and also include role-playing hooks in the form of ideals, bonds, flaws, things that they ought to know. And there's a lot of other things that backgrounds bring to it as well. For example, if a player chooses a criminal background, one of the options for the character's bond is, I'm trying to pay off an old debt I owe to a generous benefactor. If that's the character's bond, you should work with the player to decide who the generous benefactor is and build relevant storylines into the larger campaign. Now, this is certainly around the concept of party creation, and I have no problems with this. There is a very modern view of Dungeons and Dragons where we kind of go backwards. Instead of players bringing in a character and building their character for the campaign, the Dungeon Master will instead try to build the campaign based on numerous character backgrounds and what they're trying to get out of the story. Okay, I don't particularly work that way, but they have obviously decided to present it as an option because it's a very modern version of how Dungeons and Dragons is played, and there are a lot of people playing like that in Dungeons and Dragons 5e. So character and party creation provides the fundamentals you would expect. There's nothing sort of that stand out there. They've covered all the stuff you kind of would expect. Okay. Party formation. During session 0, your role is to let the parties build the characters they want to help them come up with explanations for how their characters came together to form an adventuring party. Okay? It can be helpful to assume that the characters know each other and have some sort of history together. Basically, these are things that we've been telling people for ages. However brief that history might be. Here are some questions you can ask your players as they create their characters to get a sense of the party's relationship. And party formation is actually a big part of session 0. Even if you don't run session 0, you're probably still going to be doing something like this anyway. So here are the questions they have. Are any of the characters related to each other? So that would be like family relations, siblings, extended family. What keeps the characters together as a party? And that's really important. What does each character like most about every other member of the adventuring party? Still a very good, important question that actually is to make sure that they would stay together. So I actually think these are all decent questions. Does the group have a patron? And then they refer you to Chapter 2, group patrons for patron examples. This is basically to give everybody the same patron, so they've sort of got the same major motivation. And that's all good. There's nothing wrong here with what we've got so far, okay? So party formation offers some really useful questions, which have honestly probably had more depth in older Dungeon Master guides. I could sit down here and pull out my Dungeon Master guide for Dungeons & Dragons 4E and find these sorts of questions in a section, and it would probably be about 4 times as long. I could go onto the internet and probably find questionnaires that are pages and pages long. Whether that would be useful to you or not is a different story. You don't want to be presenting too much of a survey to players when you're starting out. But they have covered the basics that you needed. But certainly it's not got the depth that you would expect from older Dungeon Master guides. And I'm going to say it right now that I think the existing Dungeon Master guide for Dungeons & Dragons 5e is a poor Dungeon Master guide. Okay, so let's move on to the next section here. And that is origins, or party origins. If the players are having trouble coming up with, say, a story for how their characters meet, they may choose an option from the party origin table, or let a D6 or six-sided dice roll choose for them. So you don't have to actually select it. If you can't get everybody to agree, you just roll a dice and pick that one. I don't know that that necessarily is going to be a very good idea, and I don't think that necessarily everybody's going to play along with that. And it's always one of the biggest problems when you try to get everybody to have the same party origin, is getting everybody to agree. It's very difficult sometimes. You should spend part of session 0 helping the players flesh out the details. For example, if the characters came together to overcome a common foe, the identity of that enemy needs to be determined. If a funeral gathering, so if you have a funeral gathering, the identity of the deceased or each character's relationship to them need to be fleshed out. So it's giving you some sort of meat and potatoes. Now the actual table itself is pretty small, and it could of course be bigger, but let's have a look at what we've got. Origin stories, first one. So the characters grew up in the same place and have known each other for years. Okay, pretty easy, pretty standard stuff. The characters have united to overcome a foe, probably a common foe in this case. The characters were brought together by a common benefactor who wishes to sponsor their adventures. A funeral brings the characters together. A festival brings the characters together. The characters find themselves trapped together. I've always found that particular one not to work very well, but they've given you some options there available to be used by the Dungeon Master to sort of get everybody on the same page. Okay, so nothing wrong with any of that. I would only say that the party origin table is a bit small, but it's still useful, it's still helpful. It will allow the players to actually connect all their characters together and connect them to the adventure. And that's actually the more important aspect of getting the characters into the adventure, is not so much them developing backgrounds and building the character, but making sure that they all have the same motivation rather than you have the lone wolf syndrome. Okay, so next section. Running a game for one player. A DM or Dungeon Master running a game for one player should spend part of session 0 working with that player to come up with their character's backstory. Okay, well, I don't think they necessarily have to do that, but I suppose they could. Then let the players decide if they want the character to have a sidekick. And then it says, see the section on sidekicks in the chapter. Okay, that's fine. We're moving on. You might need to help the player run the sidekick for the first few sessions, and should make sure the player understands the functions and limitations of a sidekick or sidekicks. Now, that's fine, provided the Dungeon Master does in fact understand the limitations and function of the sidekick. And we know probably what the sidekick's function is, but what are their limitations? Because it's a new mechanic, therefore, it's not necessarily going to be completely obvious unless you've actually run them a few times and done it for a while. Sidekicks are stalwart companions who can perform tasks both in and out of combat, which is important to point out, including things such as setting up a camp and carrying gear. That doesn't mean the sidekick needs to be your bag man or lady, okay? So ideally, sidekick's abilities should complement those of the main character. For example, a spellcaster makes a good sidekick for a fighter or a rogue. So in other words, you're trying to sort of expand the repertoire of abilities within the group. Here's what I would say about this section. Running a game for one player is a difficult task at any time. And it's certainly, this section focuses exclusively on the sidekicks that are mentioned and detailed in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, which is great. I think sidekicks is a great addition to the game. I honestly do. I think it's worthwhile having there. For the right purposes, it's great. But it discusses nothing else. And you could go to, like I said, anywhere on the internet, and probably any YouTuber, and you'll find a video on how to run games for small groups or a single player somewhere, and some of the strategies you would use. And some of the strategies you would use is not just, let's just use sidekicks. So it's a bit sparse here. There's not an awful lot. And it's fine for somebody who's getting into the game, but if you are been around a while, it's probably not going to be enough for you. Okay, let's talk about the social contract. And I have a video on this topic. I'll have videos on all of these topics probably. Dungeons and Dragons is first and foremost meant to be a fun experience for everybody, okay? Which makes perfect sense to me. It's a cooperative game. If one or more participants aren't having fun, the game won't last long. In other words, they break down and everybody leaves. Or somebody leaves and that's enough to make it impossible to run the session or the game in some way. Session 0 is the perfect time for you and the players to discuss the experience they're hoping for, as well as topics, themes, and behaviour they deem inappropriate. Out of this discussion, a social contract begins to form. Sometimes a social contract takes shape organically. I can tell you now that it almost never takes shape organically, but I suppose there is probably a time when it might. I've never seen it. But it's good to practice to have a direct conversation during session 0 to establish boundaries and expectations. A typical social contract in Dungeons and Dragons groups includes implied and explicit commitment to the following points. And it's going to go through a whole bunch of different things. I'm going to read this out. Please do not get scared off as I read through this section, because it does kind of read like a war propaganda advertisement at some points. And I believe that Bob Willbuilder did a brilliant video actually demonstrating this, but you'll get my point as we go through here. You will respect the players by running a game that is fun, fair, and tailored for them. You will allow every player to contribute to the ongoing story and give every character moments to shine. When a player is talking, you are listening. Okay, so that's a very focused, specific way of dungeon mastering. Okay, and I would say that most of it is probably right. I would also like to point out that it is a very focused and very narrow perspective of the types of games that dungeon masters run and do in a healthy way. The players will respect you and the effort it takes to create a fun game for everyone. The players will allow you to direct the campaign, arbitrate the rules, settle arguments. When you are talking, the players are listening. Okay, all right, well, that's easier said than done. We'll keep going. The players will respect everyone or respect one another, listen to one another, support one another, and do their utmost to preserve the cohesion of the adventuring group or adventuring party. I mean, I think what it's probably getting at is that it's actually not so important to establish the adventuring group or party. It's to establish and make sure the cohesion of the actual player group, okay, is preserved. That's the important thing. It's not so much the characters in the adventure, because that's what they're talking about. It's actually the players that make up the group, and the Dungeon Master is part of the group. Should you or a player disrespect each other or violate the social contract in some other way, the group may dismiss that person from the table. And this is the section, okay, specifically this is the sort of thing that would have come almost directly from Dungeons and Dragons Adventurers League. And I know this because I read that sort of stuff when I was a league coordinator. Okay, I was a local league coordinator for many years, and well, a year or two. And then look, that's exactly the sort of way they would discuss it. And that's probably a bit on the hard side, because it's not necessarily as easy and simple as that. And we'll get to this. It's not that I don't believe that you shouldn't respect people, but we'll come up with an understanding of what I mean by this. The social contract covers the basics, but individual groups might require additional agreed upon terms to guarantee a fun play experience for all. And a social contract typically involves a group's members learning more about one another. I would also like to point out that a social contract doesn't always look like this. It might look different for different groups. Okay? There are usually certain things that are standard right across the board, but not everything is set in concrete for all groups with their social contract, which is why sometimes it's good to actually discuss them. Okay, what I want to do with this section, because it's pretty important, is just spell out a couple of things that I have concerns around. So the social contract covers the very basics with a few examples, which is good, and how they might need adjustment to work for a group of people. And that's good too, they've actually mentioned that. What concerns me is the lack of discussion on removing players from the group, which I would like to point out is a delicate process, and there's no advice on the difference between how you would go about doing that in a public game with strangers, or with your friends at home if you're playing in a home game, or how you would deal with that if you're playing with your family. It is up to you to actually determine how that is going to work. And actually, that's probably not a bad way to actually view removing somebody from a player. But I would like to say that I think that more guidance around what happens when somebody is asked or told to leave the group by either whether it be the Dungeon Master or the group itself, okay, how you do that is that's how you manage it. Most of you who are playing this game are adults, so getting information and advice off a YouTuber or the internet about whether a player should leave a group or not is the wrong thing to be doing. Okay, you have to make that final decision as a group. Okay, and if as a Dungeon Master you are not able to manage that situation, then you may have to make that decision as a Dungeon Master. You're the adult, you make the final decision on that sort of stuff. Okay, not somebody giving you advice over the internet or, frankly, from a book. Okay, let's talk about the hard and soft limits, because I actually think they did a reasonable job around this section. Once you and the players have acknowledged the terms of the game's social contract and agreed to uphold them, the conversation can segue into a discussion about soft and hard limitations. There are many ways to mediate the discussion, and you might want to do some research to find an approach that might work well for your group. For purposes of explanation, these terms are described as follows. So a soft limit is a threshold that one should sort of think about twice before crossing, as it is likely to create some genuine anxiety, fear, and discomfort, or maybe even anger. So there are other things that can come up from going over a soft limit. A hard limit is a threshold that should never be crossed. Okay, so we've got that. And they go into more detail on this topic, which is good. So let's keep going through this. Every member of the group has a soft and hard limitation or limitations, and it behooves everyone in the group to know what they are. Make sure everyone at the table is comfortable with how this discussion takes place. Players might not want to discuss their limitations aloud around the table, especially if they're new to role-playing games or haven't spent a lot of time with certain other members of the group. One way to alleviate such discomfort is to encourage the players to share their limitations privately, so you do that privately, with you, the Dungeon Master, and allow you to present them without, and sort of, you don't have to spell them out that way, without arbitration to the whole group. So they don't have to necessarily be presented by individuals within the group. For example, players could write their own limitations on an index card, and you could read them aloud. However, these limits are presented. It would be useful for you or one of the players to compile the limits in a sort of like a one list, making up a list of them. Okay, that makes sense to be shared with the whole group. Keep in mind that any discussion about limits should be treated with care. Even sharing a person's limits can be a very painful experience, and this conversation should be handled with respect. I actually think it's offered some pretty good advice about how to deal with discussing hard and soft limitations, because usually people do not like to talk about that sort of thing at all. It's not something that comes up in the conversation very often. In fact, you could ask people this question and nobody will say anything. So actually writing it down is actually not a bad idea. I do feel that you will find that a lot of people will not write it down on an index card because they won't want to discuss those things. In fact, they may find they don't even know what they are. Okay, let's keep going. Common in-game limitations include, but are not limited to, themes or scenes of sex, exploitation, racial profiling, slavery, violence towards children and animals. Frankly, it might be violence towards a lot of different things, and not just children and animals. Notorious swearing, inter-party romance. Common out-of-game limits include unwanted physical contact, dice sharing, dice throwing, shouting, vulgarity, rules luring, distracting use of cell phones, and generally disrespectful behaviour. This has definitely been pulled from the Dungeons & Dragons Adventurers League guides that I've seen in the past. And actually, I don't have a problem with that, but I want you to be aware that it is written from a very specific purpose. And Tasha's Cauldron to Everything is very much a book designed for Adventurers League play. For those of you who are unaware, it is definitely built for that. Okay, it's not necessarily there to deal with every type of group of play. Okay, let's keep going. The discussion of limits is important because dungeon masters and players can have phobias or triggers that others might not be aware of. Any in-game topics or theme that makes a member of the gaming group feel unsafe or uncomfortable should be avoided, provided, of course, they are something that you need to avoid. If a topic or theme makes one or more players nervous, but they give you consent to include it in the game, incorporate it, and it should be handled with care. And you must be ready to veer away from such a topic and themes quickly. While Session 0 is the perfect place to start this discussion, it might not be the only time limits are addressed. Someone might cross a limit line and need to be reminded of a limit, or someone might not think to include them as a limit initially when you have the discussion. Players can also discover new limits as the campaign unfolds, making a plan to check in with the group to make sure the list of hard and soft limits is up to date, and remind everyone to revisit this list often in case it changes. And this is probably the gold in that section. For those of you who were thinking, where was Fred going to finally get his point? It's that last section that's really important. The hard and soft limits are well defined. but possibly could have offered a few more examples. I think a few more examples would have been useful. The only problem is that some soft limits and some hard limits are different for different groups and even for different people. So that might be a difficult thing to actually give you examples on without it sort of, them falling in between hard and soft, or an example being something that could sit in the hard limits or in the soft limits. The common and group limits present solid examples, in my opinion. There's good advice and there's reasons with room for adjustment. So they actually give you a reason why you cover hard and soft limits. Now, my experiences with Session Zero is nobody goes into an enormous amount of detail with hard and soft limits. They tend to come up as you play the game rather than just, oh, this is the time to do it. It usually does come up as you play. Okay, game customization. In addition to shaping the game around the characters and the adventuring party, you should be prepared to customize the game to suit the player's tastes. The Know Your Player section in the introduction of the Dungeon Master's Guide provides some guidance for doing so, based on knowing your player's archetypes to help identify what type of players are in the group. And you can ask each player any or all of the following questions. Now, what they're talking about are player game styles. Not everybody falls into a particular bracket. Some people usually, well, actually, frankly, most people fall into a range of different styles of play. And I don't want to go over that. I've done video topics on player styles for Dungeons and Dragons. There is better advice in older Dungeon Master Guides than there is in the current Dungeon Master Guide for D&D 5e. But here are the questions they put out. Which of the three pillars of adventuring do they prefer or interest you the most? Combat, exploration, or role-playing? How much humor do you like in the game? Okay. What level of technology do you prefer? Okay, so that's not technology at the table, that's technology in the game. Do you enjoy solving in-game puzzles and riddles? Do you like the track experience points? So do they like to track and experience points, or are they going to be, fine with just using milestones? Or would you rather have your character advance and level whenever the Dungeon Master decides to do so? So nothing wrong with any of those questions. And there's nothing wrong with referring them to a section in the Dungeon Master's Guide, because it does give you some idea of what's going on there. But I recently had a look at that section, and then I referred it to, and I know a lot of people hate Dungeons and Dragons 4e, but I will tell you now that the Dungeon Master Guide for 4e has got some absolutely brilliant stuff in there, and because they squashed so many magic items into the Dungeon Master Guide for 5e, they've left out a lot of stuff they should have expanded on. And frankly, that was one of those sections, and that's about customizing the game for players. Now, not every Dungeon Master is going to be customizing every aspect of the game for the players. That's another thing to point out. So game customization certainly focuses on reasonable questions that will make the game fun for everyone. So there's nothing wrong with it. Okay, next section, and this is the last section in Tasha's. House rules. House rules include optional rules such as those presented in Chapter 9 of the Dungeon Master's Guide. We're referring back to the Dungeon Master's Guide again. And rules you create. If you plan to use any house rule, Session 0 is a good time to discuss those rules with the players and solicit their input. Okay. House rules are best presented as experiments, and time will tell if they are good for your game. If you introduce a house rule in a Session 0 that turns out to have adverse effects on people's enjoyment of the game, you may jettison or revise the house rule to create a better gaming experience for everyone. Don't feel bad if a house rule doesn't end up working as well as you expected it to. Remember, the goal is to ensure everyone is having fun. Okay, one of the things I like about this, because I do not like the idea of including a lot of house rules in my game, And the house rules that I do have tend to be optional. So the players can just go with what's in the player's handbook or what's in the monster manual or Dungeon Master's Guide or whatever it is. But I will often offer up variant rules that they can choose to use or not use, and they can do that every situation that crops up. They may decide to chop and change from one or the other given the situation. I'm fine with that. So that's a different way of dealing with house rules. What I like about this section is house rules are presented as experiments that can change. This is actually a really healthy attitude to suggest in any book. And I think this is worth pointing out. In fact, I'm even wondering if that was actually mentioned to any sort of extent in the Dungeon Master's Guide. When I saw this, I thought, right, okay, we're trying to avoid people getting too attached to their house rules. And I know right now the game has been running a long time, so there's a lot of people running around with a lot of different house rules in their games. And Session 0 can, and I've had this happen to me, result in Dungeon Masters dropping a manual that they have taken to a stationary place to have bound and printed that you've expected to read. And that's the most terrifying thing that players can usually experience, is to suddenly have that many house rules dumped on their doorstep. Okay, so that has been my view, I guess, and perspective on Session 0 and Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. If you found this useful, fantastic. I have more videos on the different Dungeon Master tools in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, and some of the subclasses that players can play in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. And you're welcome to go and check those out. But if that's not your kettle of fish, don't worry, because I have hundreds of videos for players and Dungeon Masters covering every aspect of the game. I'm sure you will find something. If you want to support the channel so I keep doing video content like this, you can do that through Patreon, the Amazon affiliate links down in the description, the merchandise shelf underneath all of my videos, or just watch my videos, that's fine too. Make sure to share, like, and subscribe, hit the bell button to be notified when I go live and when I publish new videos. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s. Okay, we're back. Right, let's get into the chat. For those of you who have stuck around, I do need to drink some water, and I'm going to do that. And we are definitely going to discuss Session 0. I have done videos on Session 0. A lot of YouTubers that I know have done Session 0 videos. So this is your opportunity to let me know if there's something that stands out that you would like to point out, which makes perfect sense. I'm just going to do this just in case I miss somebody, and that is the question, #question please thing. Let's do that, because last time I didn't do that, and I should have pinned the message, and then I should have gone through the messages and dealt with everything, which now I will do. Okay, all right. Let's go. So make sure you've got a bit of water and food, because I am aware that I took a long time to present everything, but it's a long section, and I didn't have to read out everything, but I kind of wanted to do so because there's nothing hugely bad or wrong about what they've put down here. It's just probably not enough for a lot of people. That's all. Okay, so I've said hi to a whole bunch of people. That's Matt, Pat, Nick, Fender, Global Production and Gaming Review, Purple Genie, Kanoko's here, Fred Daniels here, Indiana, yep, Dave's here. How's it going, mate? It's afternoon. It is currently 1:45 p.m. for me. I'm in a small office and I am cooking. You wouldn't believe how hot it is in here right now. Okay, so what do you got here? Global Production and Gaming Review. What is your favorite campaign to run? Okay, I guess the campaign that I enjoyed running the most, I liked Curse of Strahd, but I still remember fondly running Isle of Dread. I think probably Isle of Dread is the one that I enjoyed the most because it was so different to any of the games I've ever run before. In the past, usually you know pretty much where everything's going to go. But the Isle of Dread, was a lot of fun, and it's the adventure I used to do the alpha play test for Dungeons and Dragons Next, or Dungeons and Dragons 5e, when I was giving my feedback for the Monster Manual. So yeah, that was probably the one I really enjoyed the most. Stick a towel on the freezer. I did it. I do it at work. Okay, all the time. Right, okay, I get it. Yeah, I don't know. I think after 40 minutes, I'm probably going to be. It'll be melting on me. I'm not saying that name. Is the text blurry on everyone's screen or just mine? I don't know what's been going on with the video quality of YouTube recently, but I have noticed myself that there have been, problems. Okay, so your feed froze to black. Well, that's not good. I'm not happy about that. I don't know what's going on. It shouldn't be happening at my end, and I did downgrade the resolution to make sure that you wouldn't have that sort of problem, because I had pumped it up initially. Okay. Right. Okay. Got that. All right. So what do we got here? Dave's YouTube is yeah, it is pretty crap. It is pretty crap lately in general, with either video quality or audio, and video being out of sync. Yeah, I don't know what happened. The last video live stream I did last week, okay, same time, it did not go high definition. It's like YouTube never did that. There's something wrong, and I do not know why it's going on. So if there are problems with this live stream, I do apologize, but it's not my fault. I've done everything at my end that I was supposed to do. Okay. Okay, Dave, so you've got a question. How do you get around to player backstories? Have you have them create one, or find out together as the campaign progresses? So normally with players, I prefer them to stick to 3 or 4 sentences for a background in terms of what's happening. And there's just a couple of things that I think are important. And that is where they came from, why they want to adventure, why they're with the group, okay, and what is their, basically current motivation. And that's probably good enough for me. I don't need to have any more as a dungeon master to work with. Other than that, I'm happy. Other dungeon masters will operate differently, okay? And I usually ask for that near the beginning, but it's not something they write down on a piece of paper, because those are the sorts of questions that are almost, they can be a conversation. They can be just, a discussion as you are building it into the building them into the campaign. Or more importantly, and this has been my view of dungeon mastering, is get them to build their character into the campaign. If I give them enough information about the campaign, they can build a character that will work for that campaign. And that's what I have done. And that works much better, frankly. Otherwise, you have too many different strings going in too many different directions, and trying to pull them all together is very difficult. And I know Matthew Mercer is very good at doing that sort of thing, but we're not Matthew Mercer. Okay, I'm not Matthew Mercer. Nobody else is. Matthew Mercer, there's only one Matthew Mercer. He does that, and he does that well. But he also has an underlying campaign, and he does sort of expect the players to follow along with that. And just because a player presents him with a backstory and a particular goal and so forth, doesn't mean it's going to play out exactly when they want it to, and exactly the way they want it. Does that make sense? So, yeah. Backstories, I try not to get too carried away. Remember, the story you are building is the one you're playing. That's the key to playing Dungeons and Dragons. Okay, social contract. You will listen, Zelda Dungeon Master. Yeah, it is. It did feel very much like that. It was a little bit scary, which is why I mentioned the sledgehammer. What level of technology do you prefer? Not sure I agree with that question. So Matt, here's the thing. You don't even have to worry about engaging in that question. Those questions are just there. And frankly, you can jettison any of that stuff and include something else. And I don't want to point you in the direction of different resources for session 0, because I did a video on the topic already, and all of the people that I've sat around and done collaborations on YouTube with, they've done session 0s as well, so they've got lots of resources. Bob's got them, Wally DM's got them, Kevin over at D&D Homebrew's got them, and I'm pretty sure that Dungeon Class has got them, and the list goes on. Okay, so here we go. All right, Fender, you have a question. Okay, Fender, what's this? I have a session 0 this Saturday. This video has come at the perfect time. Well, sometimes it's perfect for some people, sometimes it's not perfect for others. I'm glad it's working out for you. And Fender, you are a patron, and so you can go onto the Patreon page and ask me to do videos on a topic if you want me to. Okay. Question, what makes the 4E Dungeon Master Guide special about Session 0? Well, the 4E Dungeon Master Guide doesn't talk about Session 0. What I said is it talks about the player styles. Okay? Seriously, it talks about the player styles, so it's superior in that aspect. There's another part to the 4E Dungeon Master Guide. Oh, I've got it here. I knew somebody was going to ask me that question, so I can pick up the very first one they made, okay, and flick through this, and the first few pages have exactly what you would normally expect in terms of, what is a player, what is a dungeon master, blah-de-blah-de-blah, but we only get to page 8, and on page 8 it says players and players' motivations, and it talks about actors, instigators, power gamers, storytellers, slayers, the thinkers, the watchers, okay, and each section gives you sort of like a rundown of what an actor is like, and it provides sort of how to engage that particular type of player, what to avoid or not let them try to do, and the sorts of things they are probably going to focus on. So that's a pretty good breakdown. So to give you an idea, that's in the book, I would say that's roughly about just over a quarter of a page on each of those styles, and you don't get anywhere near that level of detail when it comes to our Dungeons and Dragons 5e thing. I don't want to go through all these things because they made another one, because there's too much stuff. I could never do it. It'd have to be another video. I would have to do a video on every different individual style. And if you guys want that, you'll let me know, okay? Hello, Wally, how's it going? And see, I'm pretty sure, and Wally will confirm this for me, that Wally has a video on Session 0 as well. And if he hasn't, he's probably building one at this very moment, okay? Because almost all YouTubers do. So they made another Dungeon Master's Guide, Dungeon Master's Guide 2 for 4E. And this is pretty much translatable to anything. So I'm turning my way through here, looking at the pages, and the first thing we get, starting on page 6, is group storytelling, okay? And it covers a lot of the stuff that you would be dealing with in Session 0, okay? All of that sort of stuff is pretty much there, and this is supposed to be more advanced stuff, okay, than you would normally get from your basic Dungeon Master Guide. So that's one aspect of it that I thought was superior in terms of Dungeons and Dragons 4e. It doesn't mean that I am, I like Dungeons and Dragons 4e and I want to go back to playing it, because I certainly do not. But it also then talks about what your players want, okay? How to deal with companions. So that's your, dealing with, a single player. So there's quite a lot already in there. Now, if you keep going through the original Dungeon Master Guide for 4E and you get past that, it then talks, there's actually a section on building a party, covering the party roles, party backgrounds, campaign details. There's almost, I would say, almost a page on that single thing. And that's actually really important stuff, right? Do we actually get that level of detail in the other one? No, we don't. We don't get that sort of level of detail, okay? And it just goes on. DM styles, It talks about different DM styles here, which frankly you would not get. There's table rules are discussed. There are 2 pages on table rules, all things that you would normally discuss in your session 0. Okay, and then we go into running the game. I don't want to keep going on, but that's from about page 8 through to page 15 of that particular book, and it's gold stuff, and it's right in the very beginning. And you just don't get that sort of thing in Dungeons & Dragons 5e. I'm sorry. There are lots of good things about that Dungeon Master Guide, but there are a lot of things that leave it flat. And frankly, can you tell me, has anybody got any idea why they thought it was necessary to go and put magic items into the Dungeon Master's Guide? I'll tell you why. Because they were trying to figure out how they can get players to buy the Dungeon Master's Guide rather than just a Dungeon Master. Okay, which is fine. We've got to make money. So let's put magic items in there, because then, you know, players would buy an entire book just full of magic items. They'd be down for that. Dungeon Masters would buy that book. But players don't just go and buy Dungeon Master Guides. That's just not something they do. So they're just trying to expand and get more people buying that book. But by doing that, they actually made it less useful to Dungeon Masters. Okay, keep working my way through here. And I do believe that me and Wally are going to be talking about the new race option in Tasha's at some point, so that will be coming up for those of you who are wondering. Okay, Fred, what do you got here? Thanks for the explanation on what's in the session 0 section of Tasha's. I'm glad. Sounds like I agree with you that there isn't much new here. Yeah, and some of it isn't that useful in games with family and friends. No, it certainly will not be. You would have to do things very differently. Mysteria. Yes, Fred. Okay, what do you got here? Isle of Dread is my favourite adventure. Yeah, well, it's my favourite, frankly. Usually when I talk about Dungeons & Dragons 5e, I will refer to Curse of Strahd, but Isle of Dread is just magnificent. You go anywhere, do pretty much anything. It's got so much going on, and my players ran through that campaign as animal wranglers for a zoo. So their goal was to capture animals and take them back to the zoo, which is I've never had a game that ran like that before. It works so well, and it was a shame that once you sort of get past that, you know, how do you continue on with that? And it wasn't so easy for me to actually work that out. Okay, Fred, what do you got here? Best advice is be respectful. Yes, listen, yes. When others talk, absolutely. And try to facilitate others having fun. Yeah, not just your own. It can't always be about just you. Absolutely. Vitro Valid, Windmaster, how's it going? In my experience, Session 0 is really useful. But I usually go for, session 0.5 session. When they meet each other, and speak with each other and their finished characters. I try to get my players to build their characters together because, frankly, it almost always becomes a problem if they're trying to do it in different rooms or away from each other. I've always found they go back and have to make adjustments for whatever reason. And also too, just getting them to actually agree on stuff and talk to each other, because often players will talk to each other but not about the right things. It's getting the players to actually talk to each other about the right things. Okay, what else you got here? You took Critical Role Session 2 characters and gave them to normal players. Party would split up so many times. Yes, absolutely. Like this goblin is stealing, or this monk is bullying me. Absolutely. They've got to be played by the right people. Wally, you know you're going to have a Session 0. The next, I know you were discussing wanting to talk about the top 5, but maybe, Wally, at some point, maybe a Session 0 video for your channel is the way to go. I know you're a puzzle channel and a trap channel, and that's where most people want to go, but Seriously? Yeah, but a lot of channels have got them. There's so many resources out there. And even if it's not in video form, it's in written content or PDFs that you can download and stuff. Okay, I would have one question about Session 0. But first I have you read Baldur's Gate Descent into Avernus? No, I haven't. I had a quick look at it, and frankly, I will probably never run that adventure. It's just not my thing. I don't usually send my players to hell unless things go completely out of control, okay, and the whole party sort of just about gets wiped, or they're all leaning towards being evil in some way. That's probably the only time that I would ever consider using Avernus as a back, as a setting for my campaign. But that's my personal opinion of and view of it, the adventure. It doesn't mean it's right. Okay. Right, next. Nick, what do you got here, Nick? 4E had a lot of juicy stuff. Yes, it did. I'm never selling my collection, well, right now anyways. Yeah, look, the Dungeon Master guides they have are really good. The Player's Guide, no, because it's for Dungeons & Dragons 4E. It's not evergreen material. The monsters in the Monster Manual, not really evergreen. But Dungeon Dad has done a pretty good job of translating a lot of those monsters from the older versions of Dungeons & Dragons over to 5e. And so that says a lot. And as we progress and you want more monsters, you may find yourself looking at older books. And that's why I try to keep all of my older monster manuals. And I will continue to do so because they always seem to wind up being more evergreen than you realise, even if there is some adjustment required. Okay. Better question is, why rules for escaping from combat chase rules are hidden in the DMG? Yeah, they are a little bit, they are somewhat hidden, aren't they? A lot of people go right past them. I totally get it. Yep, the race option in Tasha's, you're editing it right now, Wally. Cool. I will get on to the one I was doing as soon as I can. Where else would you... Oh, sorry, what's this? What's this, Matt? Where else would you put magic weapons and armor? Well, frankly, Matt, I think if they made a book and all it had was magic weapons, armor, and wondrous items in just a book, and that's all it was, that it would sell. Frankly, I do believe that would happen. Now, there are a few things you need to do. You need to put some artifacts in there that are overpowered. You need to put some stuff in there that's sort of middle range. And you need to put a lot of items that Dungeon Masters won't be scared off by, that do very small things, that aren't combat focused and are more utility focused. What I'm talking about is more like Harry Potter and some of the magic and stuff that they had there. If you want to send a message to somebody, a piece of paper that you fold up, you write your message on the piece of paper, you fold it up into a dart, you throw it, and it just flies to wherever it needs to go, to the person you're delivering it to. Those are the sorts of magic items which have a lot of different uses. I mean, what am I talking about? The rod. The unmovable rod is a good example of a magic item that can be used in so many different ways. It does not appear to be overpowered, and it probably isn't until people start to figure out how to use it, okay? And I think it would do really well, frankly, immensely well. And isn't it surprising? A lot of people have been saying this, but I've been saying it for ages, that Wizards of the Coast needed to put out lots of really short adventures, like really short adventures that you could run as a standalone, single session game or adventure. And Candlekeep Mysteries is sold out and a bestseller on Amazon after less than a day on that site. As soon as it went up, less than a day, it's sold out and it's a bestseller. And it's not even available. It's only pre-order. It's going to keep doing that sort of thing. If they keep doing that sort of stuff, if they keep making those sorts of things, okay, the right way, they'll do very well. I don't think there has been a Dungeons and Dragons 5e adventure book that has ever sold out on Amazon like that and been a bestseller. I know that Matt Mercer's book Wildmount went to bestseller, but it did not sell out that quickly. It took a little while. It did really well, but this has just jumped right past all of that. Okay. I've got to keep up with this fairly quickly, otherwise I will lose my mind. Okay, Wally, what do you got here? Also, Sly Flourish has a great guide to Session Zero. Absolutely. Sly Flourish is my go-to in many cases. It's in the Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master book. Can I just point out, though, that you will find an article for free on Session Zero on Sly Flourish's website. Okay? And if you find my video, you will probably find a section, a link to his article on Session Zero, because I know he's like that. He would do that. His YouTube channel will have a section. He'll have a video on Session Zero, and links to his articles and everything as well. Okay, what else you got here? Vetro Valid. What do you got here, Windmaster? And lastly, thanks for your videos about Curse of Strahd. I did not use everything, but they were still really useful. No, I don't expect you to use everything. Those videos are trying to be a toolbox, so you decide to take what you want. This Saturday we are finishing Curse of Strahd after 1 year and 4 months. Yeah, it took me about 1.5 years to get through it. Kilrathi, how's it going? Didn't D&D 3.5 have a dedicated books for weapons and gear like Pathfinder does? Yes, it did. They did not do so well. But here's the thing. The kinds of magic items and gear they put in there and the amount of books they put out. 3.5 put out so many books. Nobody could ever keep up with it. Okay? The difference is here. If you decide to put out a book on magic items and you put the story elements, what's the story behind the magic item, then a dungeon master can take that one item and build a story around the magic item. It's just like dungeon masters going through the monster manual and building a story around that particular monster, whether it be a dragon or something else. Okay? If you give them those sorts of tools and you give them a wide enough range of very, very weak and utility-based magic items, right through to the legendary artifacts and so forth, and you give them enough, if you put enough stuff in there, that players will actually come across them, because dungeon masters won't avoid them, then they will actually be really useful for you to have. And frankly, I believe that dungeon masters and players will buy that book. I do believe it. But you do have to have the story element. It can't just be here's a magic item and here's how it works. You have to put the story with it as well. Okay. Moving on. Advanced Weaponry Guide or something. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I remember the book. Matt, great idea about the magic items book. It would sell really well. I'm sure it would. What do you got here, Wally? Do you know if Candlekeep Mysteries will be all new adventures or old adventures refurbished for 5e? No, hang on. No, this is all new. It's all new. So, Kate Welsh, I believe that Kate Welsh was probably the springboard for this particular idea, because she did talk about wanting to get more women writing Dungeons and Dragons adventures. And so there's quite a lot of authors of these adventures that are women, not just women, but also men, but there are a lot of women who are writing these. And the discussion was sort of, what are they going to look like? They're out of the minds of people who have just come up with stuff. And although it says Candlekeep Mysteries, it doesn't mean that all the adventures take place at Candlekeep. There's probably only a handful that do, as far as I understand. They go everywhere. There'll be elements of Spelljammer and planar travel in there. There are some adventures that are going to feel very Scooby-Doo. I believe that Amy Vorpal has got a particularly interesting sense of humour, and she should try to get a particular character past Chris Perkins, but Chris Perkins reads everything that goes past him, and he spotted it, so it got eliminated. But they present each of those adventures as presenting a different monster, and if it's not a different monster or different type of monster than you're normally used to seeing, it's an NPC that should stand out in a crowd. Okay, so I guess the question is, see, I did a short on Candlekeep, less than a minute. I gave you the basics that we knew. Do people want me to speculate and tell you what I think is going to be in the book? Is that really the video that people want? Because if that's the video you want, I will make that video while I'm sitting at the beach tomorrow, because that's where I plan to be. And if I have to sit under a tree and set up my camera and talk about Candlekeep mysteries, I'm happy to do that. But I can't give you definitives on a book just yet. I know a lot of bits and pieces about it, but yes, it's definitely new stuff. Do you know what is more amusing about Candlekeep Mysteries is people knew almost nothing about this book, and they still pre-ordered it to the point of making it a bestseller and it's selling out. I think that speaks volumes. Okay, all right, so we have moved off session 0 very quickly. Okay, here we go. Here's a question. Fender, about the hard and soft limits. There's a free PDF by Monty Cook, yes, called Consent in Gaming. It has a list of stuff to hand out. Having a list helped me to express some possible points. Yes, I know the one you're talking about. I think Monty Cook's list is a very extensive list, for those of you who don't know. It covers everything under the board. So there'll be a few things. You don't want to try and do all of that. It's probably a bit much. But it will certainly help you build it out so that your group has an idea of, what is acceptable and what is not acceptable, and what's going to work in the group and what's going to make the whole thing just implode and self-destruct. Yeah, yes, Fender, you're right. It would be helpful for players and probably also helpful for dungeon masters. But what do you got here, Windmaster? Yeah, magic items are weird. Uncommon one can be gloves of swimming and climbing, equals you are better at swimming and climbing, or broom of flying equals infinite flying, same price category. Yeah, to be fair, I think Xanathar's Guide to Everything did magic items really well. I wanted more magic items kind of like in that vein, but maybe a little bit further on and moving more in the vein of Harry Potter. Those movies and books present magic items that are sort of used sort of in mundane ways. They're almost, there's almost an element of magic being used to make life easier and faster and more efficient and all that sort of stuff. And I think that would be really fun. Yeah. Okay, Zalzot, first time comments, but wanted to say you have been a great resource to me as a new Dungeon Master. That's great to news. Thank you very much. I'm glad to hear it. In your coverage of books and scenarios, specifically the Yawning Portal and the Sunless Sigil. Thanks. You are welcome. Gosh, I don't even remember where I talked about that, but if that was helpful to you, good, excellent. Hi Darren, how's it going? What do you think about the infested and haunted sections of Tasha's? Plan to use them in my Strahd campaign. Curious about your thoughts. Actually, I don't want to talk about those areas too much because I will do a video on them. I would have liked more of that sort of stuff in Tasha's, because when I looked at it and I thought, okay, this is what they've got here, and then I started to realize, because you'll know that there's also a table that goes with them. Each of those sections has like a table, and it was like, well, hang on, this is like a story here. Oh, here's another story. Oh, that's another story. I was like, here's a whole lot of little mini adventures that I can put together in some way. So I actually think it's really impressive. But I will talk more about that some other time. But so Darren, I can totally understand you wanting to use it in the Curse of Strahd. Absolutely. Makes perfect sense to me. There are a lot of really cool elements to it that will shake things up. And of course, you should absolutely modify the Curse of Strahd. Hi, John. How's it going? Enjoy your time at the beach. I will absolutely enjoy my time at the beach tomorrow. But yes, if people want me to talk about candles, Candlekeep, I'm happy to do so. But I think you're probably better off to wait until I release a bit more information, and I'm sure they will. That's going to happen. Nick, what do you got here? Do you use third-party resources in your campaign or just Wizards of the Coast produced material? Okay, so Nick, I used Kobold Press and Paizo. So I've never been fond of Paizo's Pathfinder, or even, I didn't even want to touch Pathfinder 2E. When I started to look at it, I was like, oh no. Oh, no. And they really are just, for me, photocopies of 3.5. And I had enough of 3.5. I was happy to see it go. And I played Pathfinder, for those of you who are wondering what the heck's going on here. But they write pretty good adventures, and they would write short adventures. So I have a lot of their adventure books. So I use them. But recently I found that Kobold Press puts out these really short adventures, such as Prepared and Prepared 2 and the Book of Lairs. Now the Prepared books are like one-page adventures with a map, and I can prep that in 5 minutes. And frankly, they're actually so well organized, much better organization than something like Icespire Peak and the D&D Essentials kit. That adventure looks like a beginner's adventure, but it's not. But the stuff coming out from Kobold Press was really impressive. The second one they did, Prepared 2, was not quite as good, I felt. I felt like that was not as good as the first one. And then the Book of Lairs that Kobold Press put out, the first one, the adventures are about 4 pages long, come with a map, and they cover a range of different levels, and they're all sort of compiled. You get a whole bunch of different adventures in this book, and they were really good. They took a little bit longer to prepare, but they were still solid enough and answered enough of my questions that I could do a lot with them. And if I wanted to include something else, I could, and that was pretty useful. I'm really not surprised that Candlekeep Mysteries has sold out. I really am not surprised at all in terms of pre-orders. And I feel like they might get into a situation where they have to do a second printing. I think it's entirely possible. I've also got another book from Kobold Press, which is another Book of Lairs. I think it's the Creature Codex Lairs book. I haven't done a video on the topic because I haven't had time. I've got so many books I would like to talk about. I just don't get time to do that. But I'll take some time off work pretty soon. I just need one more day in lieu, or one more day off, and man, I'm taking 2 weeks off, and then you'll get a whole bunch more stuff. So those are the sorts of things I tend to use, if you were wondering. So I don't just use Wizards of the Coast. And I do use monsters from different books. I do have the Creature Codex, Tome of Beasts from Kobold Press. I do make my own stuff from time to time. Okay, Darren, thank you for the input. Love your material. Looking forward to the video. We very much keep up the good work. Okay, this is my channel for descriptive, more in-depth information. Yeah, I know a lot of people. Look, I know a lot of people keep getting turned off by some of the shorts videos. I see people unsubscribing. I'm going to make it clear to you. Everything that you're seeing in terms of my shorts videos, that's the B-list material, okay? It's news bulletins and maybe a product that I want to promote or I think it's cool. And I'm doing that more as an experiment. But I will also put out Dungeon Master advice, which is like less than a minute. And I noticed that I did a video on experienced Dungeon Masters think a lot. And it's done pretty well, and I think people have been pretty happy with that. You can expect more of that. If you're a player, you can expect that sort of thing as well. And yes, I used to make a lot of videos on the game mechanics using miniatures, dice and so forth. And when it doesn't get quite, when it's a bit colder, I'm going to pump out a whole bunch of those as well as shorts. So don't get too upset that I'm not always putting out really in-depth material, you know, that takes a long time to get through, because you will still get that. You're just getting this other thing as well, okay? Because frankly, most of the people who find my videos do not find it through suggested or recommended. It's almost always by search. And so I need to be able to capture some of the people and get YouTube to promote my stuff, rather than me just making sure I make content that most people will go and look for. Okay? So, and also too, I feel like there is times when a topic is so short it doesn't require me to make a full-blown video. Anyway, all right, let's keep going through here, because I'm so sweaty now. I am melting. Okay, what else have we got here? Kilrathi, holy moly, Candlekeep release date is still out to, yeah, March 16th. That's right. Less than a day it's sold out on Amazon. I'm not turning off, man. You're doing just fine. Okay, Darren, I'm glad that you're sticking around. That's good news. AJ shouted you out. That's how I found you, Fred. Yeah, no. So I mean, I hang out. I've hung out once or twice with AJ. We don't really get as much contact with each other as, you know, maybe we'd like. But he's busy. I'm busy, and I mean, AJ. The sort of stuff that AJ Pickett makes is really good, and it's almost guaranteed that somebody's going to find the stuff, because it's evergreen stuff. You know, it's monster lore, and people look for monster lore, and they love that sort of thing. And he does a lot of lore videos. That's pretty much what he does. Okay, I think we have covered session 0 till the cows go home. If you want more stuff on session 0, my advice is go and check out the video I made on session 0, and that's where you want to go. Look at that, see what it has to say, and yeah, that's it. We're done and dusted. So wherever you are in the world, and thank you for everybody who showed up, so wherever you are in the world, whether it be the morning, the night, the afternoon, or the early morning, please look after yourself, your family, and your friends. Be nice to your neighbors, and hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s.